I'm Carol Bloch. I am in Omaha, Nebraska. This is December of 2012. I recently celebrated my 69th birthday, which means next year is a biggie. I will turn 70, but I'm feeling great. Next year will also be the year that my husband and I will be celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary, so it will indeed be a big year. I have been involved in many things in the community, but my very favorite thing, my claim to fame, is being Nana to my 6 grandchildren. That is the most fun I have in my life. But I also do other things that are fun. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. My grandparents on my mother's side, which is really most of who I know, came here from Russia. My grandfather actually came here when he was 13 years old. I was told that he literally ran away from home, got on a boat, and came here. How much of that is really the case, I guess I don't know. My grandmother came at another time, and they lived partially in Brooklyn, but also on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And all of the things that you've always heard about the Lower East Side happened to my grandparents. Unfortunately, I don't know very much about my father's side of the family, and I really don't know why that is. And one of the reasons this is such a good idea is it wasn't until both of my parents passed away that I had all these questions that I wanted to ask them and never got a chance to do so. But my father was one of 5. 2 of his brothers did not live in New York. I had never met them, and I have cousins that I've never met. But he had a brother and a sister who did live in New York. One had no children and one had just one child. I have recently reconnected through email to that one cousin of mine, and so he just had his first grandchild, and that's kind of interesting. On my mother's side, was quite a different story. My grandparents were Ada and Arthur Feinberg, and they had 4 children. My mother was the youngest of 3 girls, but she had a brother who was younger than that. My grandfather was a dentist, so he was a very well-educated person, practiced dentistry in New York, so they didn't have as many of the hardships as a lot of people in New York did have at that time. My parents met at New York University. My father lived in Brooklyn at the time, and my mother in Manhattan. They both graduated from NYU with master's degrees. Education was a very important part of all of my family. My parents went on to be physical education teachers, although they taught other things all along the way. So teaching was the family business in my family. Aunts, uncles, cousins were either school teachers, one was a school nurse, one was a school principal, but everybody had something to do with the school system. This was great news because I got to spend vacations with my family and with my cousins and my aunts and uncles. We were very, very close. My grandparents retired to Woodstock, Vermont, very early. They had enough of New York. I don't know the whole story. But they retired, and in order to make money, they opened their home to asthmatic patients who were having trouble living in New York and wanted someplace green to live. And so they took in asthmatic patients. My grandfather also had an organic garden. It was about a half an acre, way ahead of his time for sure. We ate vegetables from that garden all summer long, and my grandmother canned those same fruits and vegetables, which lasted them all winter long. As I said, since all of us had the same vacations, my family on my mother's side, aunts, uncles, cousins, all went up to Woodstock, Vermont, a beautiful place, definitely on the register of historic places in this country. And that's where we spent our summers. We learned to swim in the brook behind the house. We learned to ice skate when the brook was frozen, and we had a wonderful time. I'm one of 8 first cousins, kind of close in age, so we were friends as well as cousins. In fact, when the time when it was time for me to go to camping experience or away to college, two of my older girl cousins accompanied me. As school teachers often did in New York, and when they had summers free, my parents didn't just sit around. They were counselors at summer camps. And in the East Coast, summer camp was 2 months long. So they were counselors for 3 years when my brother and I were younger, and they worked, and we came as campers. That's how they could afford for us to go to camp. So camping was also a big part of our lives, and I was a camp counselor for 3 years, my last year in high school and my first 2 summers that I was in college. I do have a younger brother who's 3 years younger than I am, of course a school teacher. He is retired, as is his wife, who's also a school teacher. So we all have a lot in common, that's for sure. I have wonderful memories of family. I went to a very large high school. There were 6,000 students in 3 grades in my high school. So instead of having more friends, it really meant you had less friends because there were fewer people to be close with, I think. But I have very good memories. And in the end of my junior year, I met Stephen Bloch. He came east to go to Colgate University, which is upstate New York, and we were introduced. It was a blind date. I was with my parents in the car, and we picked him up at a subway stop and went to a party. And if there's such a thing as love at first sight, I think that was it, because we had a great time, and we really enjoyed each other's company. The people who introduced us knew each of us, so that probably made it a little bit easier. We had some things in common. The day after the party, Stephen drove with his friend to Omaha. And so I didn't see him again until the following September. And guess what we did? We wrote letters. A rarity now. I don't know what. I guess one sends email, text, tweets. I don't do all of that stuff. But we wrote letters. And one of the amazing things, probably not so much that I have all of those letters, because you would expect that I would have saved them. But recently, when I went through some old stuff, I found that Stephen said saved letters that I wrote to him. A little known fact. We were married in New York. I was in the middle of my junior year in college, and he was in the middle of his freshman year at law school. Not the ideal time, but it worked. What can I say? He graduated from Colgate and decided to come back to Omaha to go to Creighton University School of Law because his father was very ill at the time and he wanted to be close to home. So what did I know? I was 20 years old when we were married, and Omaha was just as good as any place. I had been here 3 times before we actually got married, and met some of his friends, met his family, who I loved, and especially his sister, who was just 6 months younger than I am, and we became very good friends. We were married in 1964, January, and had a fabulous honeymoon, which was driving in his car back from New York City to Omaha. We arrived in Omaha on a Friday, moved into a furnished apartment that I had never seen, that somebody left a tremendous mess in. It was over a garage, nothing but the best. We spent the weekend cleaning up, and when Monday morning came, I went off to UNO, and he went off to law school. So one of the things I guess I always knew in my life is that I would go to college. It was like never a question in our family. It was just a given. It was just a question of where. And the only thing actually that my parents asked of me when I got married and moved to this far-off land was that I finish college, and that was not a problem. I was in the middle of my junior year, 3 more semesters, and I graduated in '65. I did my student teaching. What a surprise, I was going to become a teacher. Of course, what you may not know is that when I went to college at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, you had 2 choices if you were a woman. You could become a teacher, or you could become a nurse. And that was about all of the options that you had anyway. Or you could try and find a husband. I think that was probably what a lot of people majored in anyway. So I did my student teaching at Dundee School in Omaha one semester, and at Harrison School the other semester. Then my assigned school was Lake School on 24th and Lake. So I was really not exactly prepared for the population that I was going to get there, but I loved it. My in-laws were wonderful to me. I have something to confess about my mother-in-law. She knew that I had moved 1,300 miles away from home. My parents had never been to Omaha. They had not met my in-laws until the night before the wedding in New York. I guess they figured they didn't have to live with each other, and we had already made our decision. Steve and I had been dating for 3.5 years, and I guess that was good enough. But my in-laws were just wonderful. My mother-in-law said, you're going to have a rough first year. Can't run home to your mother so easily, but you could always run home to me. We had a wonderful relationship. Steve and I had no money, as in zero. We were both in school. He was employed part-time by an Omaha law firm, but not making very much money. My parents gave us the money that it would have cost them for me to go to college in the East, since UNO was a municipal school at that time and was not very expensive. And my mother-in-law fed us, fed us lots of good Jewish cooking, and we used to go over there every Friday night in addition to other nights. I could even get to bring my laundry, because the washing machine that we had at our apartment downstairs leaked oil into my laundry, and so that wasn't working too well. My father-in-law was ill. He had had actually 3 heart attacks. Probably today, with bypass surgery, he would have lived. But I backtrack a little bit. After I graduated, I taught at Lake School, and that very same year I did get pregnant. Planned pregnancy, of course. And my son Michael was born in October of 1966. What a joy, what a treat, what a thrill. Since he was the firstborn son of a firstborn son, at 1 month of age we had a Pinyin Aben, which, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, was very important to my in-laws. We did that, and it was a joyous, wonderful, happy occasion, all good things. And then my father-in-law, Harold Bloch, passed away 2 weeks later. So we're glad that he got to see his first grandchild born. My mother-in-law lived a few more years, but she had cancer, and so my father-in-law died when he was 51, and my mother-in-law when she was about 56. So my big regret is that they missed so much that they would have loved. They would have been ideal grandparents and would have doted as much as they possibly could over their grandchildren. In the apartment that we lived in, it was a converted apartment on 38th and Jackson Street. As I said, we lived over the garage, but soon graduated to the main house where there were 5 apartments. We were in the main apartment on the first floor. We had mahogany walls and a marble fireplace, and it was wonderful. We were renting. We had no lease, but we were renting, and my sister-in-law, Bunny, and her husband, Arnie, lived upstairs. So when Michael was born, he had an extra set of parents, and it was great. We had such a good time. We were all in school. We had few responsibilities. We played bridge. We just had lots of fun. Money was not a concern. I'll never forget the time that we went out. We did go out for pizza with my sister and brother-in-law. I haven't thought about this for years. And they wouldn't order Coke because it was too expensive. They just had water. I will be honest to say that coming from New York City to Omaha was a change. It was interesting because I met many people when I first got here that lived in small towns in western Nebraska and felt like they were coming to the big city of Omaha, where I have to say that I thought I was coming to a small town. When I first got here, I know I'm going backwards a little bit, I couldn't believe that everybody knew each other and everybody wanted to know more about me, especially the Jewish community. It took me a while, because I was only 20 when I got here, to realize that that was nurturing and friendly and loving. When I got here, it felt smothering. I had a lot of freedom in New York. My parents were very liberal. I was a good girl. I was on my own a lot. They worked, although not until both my brother and I were in school all day. So there was a lot of getting used to. So, my son is 3 years old, and we want to have another child. And 4 years after my son was born, along came my daughter, Jennifer. Talk about a thrill. I always wanted a boy first and a girl second, and there I was. I forgot to start this with something very important, and that's what I had planned to do. I am a very, very lucky person, and I know it. I have a wonderful husband. I have wonderful children and children-in-law and grandchildren. No life goes without its challenges, and certainly we've had them. But when I look around me, I know how lucky I am and how blessed I am, and I do remember that every single day. So after my children were born, I was the consummate stay-at-home mom. I think they wrote those words for me. I did not do any volunteer work outside of home, except as it pertained to my children's school. I taught junior grade books in their classroom. I taught Green Circle, which is an inclusive program in some other schools. I was on curriculum committees. I was on BBYO board. Whatever I did, of course, later on, pertained to what my kids were doing. And of course, I was in the car a lot, as we all were at that time, taking my kids to all kinds of lessons, whether it was Hebrew school or gymnastics or soccer or whatever. When Jennifer was going to kindergarten, somebody approached me to join the Junior League of Omaha. I didn't know too much about it, but I learned that it was a volunteer organization where they trained volunteers to go out into the community and do wonderful things. I thought it sounded very interesting. I asked a few people about it, because not being from Omaha, I didn't know. I always thought it was kind of a highfalutin, high society kind of thing, and found out it wasn't, because the people who were wanting to get me to join were certainly not in that category. I told them that I would do it, but I couldn't do it until both of my kids were in school all day, which meant one more year, and they allowed me to wait. My Jewish friends said, "How can you do that? The Junior League of Omaha doesn't take Jewish women." To which I replied, "If you want them to take Jewish women, you've got to join when they ask you." I think Junior League had been around quite some time, 60 years, I don't know. And I was Jewish woman number 3, 4, or 5, something like that, so there weren't very many. I didn't see why that was a big deal. Anyway, I joined, and I guess that was my entree to volunteer life. When I moved to the house that I am in now, which I have been in for 41 years, I remember distinctly walking down the street one day. I think I was walking home from walking one of the kids to school, saying to myself how lucky I was, and if I ever could, I wanted to give back. And so that's how it began, I guess. I only taught school the 1 year, didn't want to leave my children. I tried substituting once. I went off to substitute. I got a babysitter, which I thought would be a nice diversion. And I got there, and about an hour into the morning of babysitting there, I said, "What in the world am I doing? I'm leaving my children home with a sitter so I can do this." I didn't have my own lesson plans, which of course would drive me crazy. So that was the end of that. I never substituted again. Always did think I would go back to being a school teacher after the kids grew up, but it didn't happen. I got into the world of volunteering, and I was lucky enough that I could continue with that. Junior League trained me well, and I got to know so much about Omaha. I worked with organizations such as Goodwill, Girls Inc., Child Saving Institute, many of the organizations that I had heard about but really didn't know much about it. And because of the way the Junior League is structured, I would be able to work 1 year with each of these different organizations. And I loved it. I met people that I would meet no other way but through the Junior League, and they are people that I see all the time, whether working out or going to the symphony or whatever. And they are among my friends, so I really enjoy that. Speaking of the symphony, one of the things I knew that was going to take my volunteer attention was not doing the symphony. Symphony's great, ballet, fabulous. Love the music, love what was going on, but I wanted to do something that nobody else was doing, in that wanted to help in places that were not so easy to get volunteers. So I was with the Junior League, I don't remember, there was a mandatory retirement age at age 40, I believe, and that was mostly what I did besides doing a lot of stuff at school. Then I had a call one day from Jan Schneiderman and said, I want to come and talk to you. So I said, sure, what do you want to talk about? I want to talk about National Council of Jewish Women. Well, I couldn't be rude. Now Jan Schneiderman is a member of our extended family. Interesting. Couldn't be rude, so I said, sure, come on over. She said, I know you've been involved in a lot of stuff in the community, but your resume doesn't include the Jewish community, and National Council of Jewish Women could really use your help. One of the things that was a very wonderful thing that came out of the Junior League is I met somebody who was involved with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood at that time was Planned Parenthood of Omaha Council Bluffs. Now it's part of a region. Not only did it merge with Lincoln and then become a statewide affiliate, but it now encompasses Iowa and 2 other states. She told me about what she did, and family planning sounded like such a reasonable idea to me. I couldn't see any other way. But she told me about the things that she was involved with, and she told me that they were looking for some way to have an extra fundraising arm of the organization, since the clients that they had paid for their services based on a sliding fee scale, and so most of the funds came from individuals. I thought that sounded terrific, and one thing led to another, and with a couple of other people, I decided we began the Friends of Planned Parenthood. Started right over there in my living room. A few of us got together. We did not have the computers at that time, hard to believe. We sat there and we each brought all of the address books that we had of all of the organizations we had and made lists of people that we wanted to solicit to become friends of Planned Parenthood. So it was very time consuming, but it was terrific, and I served on that board for 6 years and then was asked to join the policy setting board of Planned Parenthood of Omaha Council Bluffs, where I ended up serving 13 years. I was also on their regional board, and I used to go to Chicago for meetings. I would go to New York because we went often to New York because I had family there, and I would sit in on the national meetings, which was also very interesting. I probably chaired most of the committees on the board and really loved it. We were talking about important issues. We were talking about health care. We were talking about things that were important to families, and that's where my heart was. So it was very easy. Like I said, I probably served on every committee and chaired most of the committees nominating public affairs. Public affairs was my interest, I think, out of all the things. But what I liked about the Planned Parenthood board was very multifaceted. It turned out to be political, but it was healthcare, like I said, and families and education, going out into the schools. Finding our way to be able to go out into the schools was a project in and of itself. And I loved the people that we worked with. I became the president of the board in 1988. I think the only board I've actually served as president of, which is interesting. I like to be a worker. I like to be beyond the scenes. I like to be in control, but not necessarily in charge of the whole thing. I wanted my life to be free enough to spend with my family when they need me, and to travel with my husband when we had the occasion to do so. But Planned Parenthood was really important. One of the committees I chaired, I think of now, was the 50th anniversary celebration of Planned Parenthood in Omaha. I was the chair of that committee, and we decided to bring Faye Waddleton to Omaha from New York. She was the chair of the national organization. She's also about 6'2" in stocking feet and with high heels, taller than that, and I was in charge of taking her around. Shall I stand up? No. You know, I'm barely 5 feet, and we were probably a Mutt and Jeff sight to behold. But she was great, and she was a wonderful figurehead for Planned Parenthood, and talked so convincingly about the importance of family planning. It wasn't until later years of my involvement that abortion became an issue. Even though it was made legal in 1973, it wasn't a major issue. Interestingly enough, I've had many people over the years ask me how I got involved with politics. I've worked for many candidates. I didn't get involved in politics. The issues that I cared about, family planning, keeping abortion safe and legal, separation of church and state, on and on, all of my issues became political. And I had no choice. If I wanted to maintain and protect those issues, I had to become political. I had relationships with Senator Exum, with Representative Hoagland, with Bob Kerrey, back in the days where you were really listened to. I still pound my head against the wall, and I still go and visit Senator Johans and Senator Nelson, but those were the ones that I dealt with a lot at the time. I wrote a lot of letters. My files go back to the time where I used carbon paper in my typewriter to write letters, so that'll give you a little of my ancient history. Representative Peter Hoagland once gave me credit for helping to change his mind on something, which was interesting. There was a piece of legislation called the Family and Medical Leave Act, which now we all take for granted, but it was allowing parents to have medical leave, unpaid, for the birth of a child or when somebody needed medical attention and their job was held for them. He was against this because he thought it would be very, very expensive. And I talked to him a lot, and he credited me at a fundraising event once with changing his mind and making him realize that that was an important thing that he should support. I've been involved in many community organizations, but not too many at one time. I'm kind of a one-at-a-time person, and I plunge myself into whatever I'm doing at the moment. So Planned Parenthood definitely took up a lot of my time. And slowly, over the years, I found that my volunteer work did become a full-time job. It really was. I was working all the time, and I was in my office in the evenings, but it was my job. I wasn't getting paid for it, but it was nonetheless a job. And then the phone rang, and it was Jan Schneiderman, who's now a member of our extended family. She wanted to come over and talk to me about the National Council of Jewish Women. And so she did. She said, I've been watching you. You've done wonderful things in the community. You've worked on a lot of different issues and brought people from out of town into Omaha. And the National Council of Jewish Women Omaha section needs you to be the Vice President of Public Affairs and Education. Well, I was certainly interested in both of those things. It was kind of unusual to come into an organization at the Vice President's level without having served on the board, but she seemed to think I could handle it, and so I plunged in. One of the things I liked about NCJW was that it too was multifaceted. The resolutions, the priorities that they work for really are all over the place and encompass family planning and civil rights and Israel and so many issues that in the area of public affairs and of education, there was so much to choose from. I divided the tasks among other women in the community, and she wanted education, she wanted us to bring in people, and we did. We brought in Sally Jesse Raphael, who preceded Oprah Winfrey by many, many, many years, but that was when she did. And we brought in Judith Whitcomb, who was a reproductive rights leader in St. Louis, and we had wonderful attendance, which was my task, is what I was asked to do. So I ended up serving on the board for many, many years. My next job was a national appointment by the national president of NCJW. I became the state public affairs chairwoman for NCJW. Now, did people in Washington know that there were only 850 members of NCJW at the time? No, they did not. They only knew that I represented the NCJW in Nebraska, and so I had the power that others had, where there were many sections in a state like New York and California. I represented just here. I could speak on behalf of NCJW in the state. I went to many meetings, and that my capacity of working with NCJW was that I got to serve on many community boards in my capacity as the state public affairs chairwoman. I can't remember them all right now, but some of them I helped to put together, some of them I sat on. The Pro-Choice Coalition, which was the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Rights. I worked with Voices for Children and was a consultant for them on their Kids Count project. I worked with the Nebraska Commission on the Status of Women. I worked a little bit with the Foster Care Review Board. It opened the doors for me to be not only a representative of NCJW, where people in our state could know that, yes, there were in fact Jewish women and Jewish people that lived in the state of Nebraska, but, when you're a volunteer, there's got to be something in it for you, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed meeting the new people, I enjoyed the friendships, and I just loved what I did. I was the state public affairs chair for 10 years, a long time. I was trained by NCJW's Sammy Moshenberg in Washington, D.C., and went to Washington at least once a year for training with people who did the same thing that I did in other states. And of course, it was great to be able to hear what they were doing and they to hear what we were doing in Nebraska. So that was terrific. And then I was asked to serve on the national board of National Council of Jewish Women. And after careful thought, I decided to do that. Loved it. It meant traveling to New York at least once a year for board meetings and to D.C. at least once a year. But as I recall, it seems like I was doing a lot more than that. Terrific women. At that time, there were 3 of us from Omaha NCJW on the national board. Very, very unusual. Jan Schneiderman, Carol Katzman, and myself. I was on that board for 2 terms, which was 6 years. The first term was Carol, Jan, and I, and the second term, Carol did not come back, but it was the 3-year term when Jan Schneiderman was the national president of the National Council of Jewish Women. So, what a thrill that was. It was terrific. As I alluded to before, and I'll digress a little bit, Jan became part of our extended family. We didn't have very much family here. The Bloch family, there was just not much family, and my kids did not grow up with what I had, with lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins. And then Jenny met and married Scott Meyerson, and my family increased instantly. Scott Meyerson, who I adore, is one of the 4 children of Deanie and Larry Meyerson. 3 of Deanie and Larry's children live in Omaha with families, and they have in-laws. So we have all of our holidays together and have a wonderful extended family. We have cousins that adore each other, play together, take care of each other, and it's a wonderful thing. The first year after they were married and had their first child, we decided, because I loved having Thanksgiving, that we would have dessert at my house after they would go to Thanksgiving dinner at the Meyersons. So they went to Thanksgiving at the Meyersons and came over here for dessert with their baby, and they said, "This is great, and we're not doing this anymore. We're going to have all of our holidays together because we want to all be together. We don't want to have half here and half there." And so we did, and it has worked beautifully ever since. So, where was I? With NCJW and other organizations in the community, I was lucky enough to receive some awards from NCJW and Planned Parenthood for distinguished service, which I'm very proud of, and for my volunteer work. So it's always nice. It's always nice when somebody says thank you and somebody recognizes what you do, but that wasn't what I was all about. I did receive the Hannah G. Solomon Award, a very prestigious award from the National Council of Jewish Women, and I am very proud of it. But again, that's not why I did it. Bringing us kind of up in the volunteer work up to the present, I currently serve on the board of Jewish Senior Services. I think I've been on that board for about 8 years. I also served on the committee that decided to merge Jewish Family Service with Jewish Senior Services, which turned out to be a wonderful marriage and has worked out very well. I have lived through the planning stages of the newly constructed Rose Blumkin Jewish home, and whatever I was able to contribute, I was thrilled to do so. One of the reasons that I was wanting to be on that board is my mother was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and she and my father, who were inseparable, had a wonderful, wonderful life together, had retired early and moved to Miami, did not have any family where they were. And in going down and visiting there and seeing where she lived, trying to understand what kind of a facility was important in Omaha and what kind of outreach programs. My father was her caretaker. They were, as I said, inseparable. Hard to imagine a couple more devoted to each other. But when my father died, we needed to definitely move my mother, and it was a question of whether she should come to Omaha or should she go to live on Long Island near my brother, which had an absolutely wonderful facility for Alzheimer's patients. Of course, being the girl in the family, being the control person, having a wonderful relationship with my mother, I wanted her to come to Omaha, and I investigated all of the options that were here. There were none, including the Rose Blumkin Jewish Home. Their population of Alzheimer's patients was not separate from the general population, and I knew that that was not going to work. So she went to New York. I felt very guilty, but for her, it was perfect. And it was actually wonderful for my brother because he got to spend really some very quality time with her, even though she may not have remembered it. It turned out to be a very wonderful experience for her. And the fact that she was in New York, my cousins and my cousins' children were able to go and visit her too. Yes, it's too bad it was at the end of her life, but they were able to do that. My mother died almost a year to the day after my father. They always say that the caretaker goes first, and he did. And they had both, I knew exactly what their wishes were. My children know. They talked about that endlessly, about their living will and what their wishes were for their end-of-life care. And I was with both of my parents, even though they were neither one of them in Omaha. I was with both of them, with each of them at the end. They both wanted to be cremated, and they were. They were buried after my mother died. Each of their urns were buried next to each other in a Jewish cemetery on Long Island. And it was so fitting that they were buried at the same time because they were so wonderful with each other. So, how did I get over there? I don't know, but the other thing that I work with here now, currently, is the Anti-Defamation League. Talk about multifaceted. It has issues literally all over the world. It is I'm on the regional board, and we serve the Midwest region, but it's also part of a national organization and an international organization. I have been the co-chair of the Civil Rights Committee for many years, and we deal with many, many issues: separation of religion and state, Israel, discrimination of all kinds, bullying, anti-bias program. It is a wonderful, wonderful organization. I'm very proud to be part of it, and I do as much as I can, but we're so lucky that we had wonderful staff. So, I think that brings me pretty much up to date, except that while I'm talking about my volunteer work, which I was asked to do, I have left out the major part of my life, which is really my family. My husband, who is dear and takes care of me, even though we say that's not politically correct these days. I think I take care of him too. My children and the people that they married are accomplished, smart, wonderful, fabulous people in the jobs that they do, in the lives that they hold, and they're wonderful parents. And it's where I want to spend my time. Nana is my most important title, even though I've had many. And I have 6 grandchildren that call me Nana. They range in age from 5 to 14. Last year, my 14-year-old Jake had his bar mitzvah. Kvilling doesn't begin to possibly describe that experience. It was wonderful. I get to spend a lot of time. My daughter, Jenny, lives next door, the envy of many of my friends. So I get to see my grandchildren that are in Omaha whenever I want, including last night when I just bopped over and got to read bedtime stories. It's my greatest pleasure. I get to see my children that live out in outside of Reno. We have a home at Lake Tahoe, so we can get to see them very regularly. And we also take many vacations together. So I have a wonderful balance. And excuse me, I've got my family. I've got volunteer work, which I love. I have the freedom to travel when I want. And as I said, I am a very, very lucky person indeed. If I wanted to leave any message to my children through this, I would say that I felt like I have been the catalyst over these many years of, even though I only have 2 children, they don't live in the same state, of bringing them together, bringing my grandchildren together as often as possible, usually at least 2 or 3 times a year, of getting them together with extended family that live in New Jersey and New York. And I would hope that they continue to do that after I'm gone. I want you to be sure and keep in touch with each other. You're going to have to do it yourselves. And I know that you will. Thank you.